the silent dreams.
There are those who believe the past can be recovered, that through careful research, meticulous examination of documents, patient reconstruction of evidence, we can know what happened in times before our own. That history is not lost, but merely hidden, waiting to be discovered by those willing to search. Historians dedicate themselves to this work. They spend years in archives, tracing connections between fragmentary records. They read journals, deeds, letters, account books, anything that might reveal how people lived, what they valued, what they left behind. They become detectives of time, assembling scattered clues into coherent narratives. And most of the time, this works. Most history can be documented. Most stories can be told through the traces they leave in paper and ink. But some histories resist simple documentation. Some stories exist not just in written records, but in the fabric of places themselves, in stones that remember, in water that holds memory, in houses that preserve the presence of those who lived there. These histories require more than archival research. They require listening to what the place itself wants to tell. Margaret Ashford is a historian, 41 years old, trained at Girton College, Cambridge, published author of 3 well-regarded books on Victorian domestic life and social history. She is methodical, thorough, skeptical of claims that cannot be verified through documentary evidence. She believes in what can be proven. Tonight she travels to Blackwood Estate in Derbyshire. Her niece, Catherine Ashford, has written asking her to come. There is work here, Catherine says, that requires Margaret's particular skills. The estate has a complex history that needs proper documentation. Mr. Thomas Ashcroft, the owner, wishes to commission a comprehensive historical account of the property. It should be excellent research material. Country estates often have extensive archives, deeds, correspondence, household accounts spanning generations. Margaret looks forward to months of productive work, to discovering stories buried in dusty ledgers, to reconstructing the lives of people long dead. She does not know, as her train carries her north through the autumn countryside, that some histories cannot be written using documents alone, that some stories require the researcher to experience what they are studying, to become part of the narrative they seek to understand, to accept that the past is not always safely distant. Blackwood Estate remembers, and it has been waiting for someone who can synthesize all the scattered pieces, the groundskeeper's witness, the ward's memory, the solicitor's legal framework, the artist's paintings, the surveyor's maps, into a coherent whole. Margaret has come to write history. She will discover that at Blackwood, history writes itself into those who pay attention, that the archive is not just paper, but stone and water, and the patient consciousness of a house that has held memory for 200 years. The train moves through the night. In her compartment, Margaret reviews her research notes, organizes her questions, prepares for the methodical work ahead. She does not see, through the train window, the estate preparing itself, the library arranging its shelves, the documents sorting themselves by relevance rather than date, the house deciding what order to reveal its secrets, what truth to teach first. The archive is alive, and it has opinions about who should be allowed to read it. Rest now, let the story carry you. Let the documents speak. Let sleep come gentle, like ink fading on old paper, like memories preserved between pages, like the patient work of assembling fragments into truth. The story begins. I arrive at Blackwood Estate on a Thursday afternoon in October, when the autumn leaves are at their peak. The journey from Cambridge is long, train to London, then north to Derby, local line to the village, hired carriage up the valley road. But I am accustomed to long journeys in pursuit of research. I have travelled to Scottish castles, Welsh manor houses, Irish estates, anywhere documents might be found. My name is Margaret Ashford. I am 41 years old, unmarried by choice, a professional historian trained at Girton College, Cambridge. I have published 3 books: Victorian Domestic Economy, 1885, Women's Work in Country Houses, 1888, and Social Networks of the Rural Gentry, 1890. I am currently at work on a 4th, examining the relationship between property ownership and social obligation in the Victorian era. This commission, documenting the history of Blackwood Estate, fits perfectly with my current research. Country estates operated within complex webs of obligation, to family, to tenants, to local community, to the land itself. Understanding how these obligations were negotiated and maintained illuminates broader patterns of Victorian social life. The carriage climbs through beautiful countryside. The trees here are spectacular: oak, ash, beech turning gold and crimson against autumn sky. My historian's mind automatically notes the age of these plantings, estimates when they might have been established, wonders what the landscape looked like before them. And then the estate appears. Blackwood House is Georgian, red brick weathered to soft rose, symmetrical facade, classical proportions. It sits on higher ground with extensive views over parkland and valley. My initial assessment: established 1680s 1690s, possible earlier manor incorporated into later building, appears well maintained with signs of recent restoration. The carriage stops before the main entrance. A housekeeper emerges, elderly, dressed in black, the kind of woman who has run great houses for 50 years and tolerates no nonsense. "Dr. Ashford," she says, using my academic title, which I appreciate. "I am Mrs. Crawford, housekeeper. Your niece is expecting you. Please come inside." "Catherine." I have not seen her in 3 years, not since she left London after her parents' deaths. She wrote occasionally, but did not explain where she had gone or what she was doing. Now, it seems, she is here, companion to the owner, she said in her letter, and involved in historical research. Mrs. Crawford leads me through an entrance hall of impressive proportions: marble floor, dark paneling, grand staircase. The architecture is exactly as expected for the period, but there is something unusual about the space, something I cannot quite identify. The way light falls, perhaps, or the sense that the hall is observing me as much as I am observing it. A young woman descends the staircase as we enter. "Aunt Margaret." Catherine looks well, better than when I last saw her, certainly. The grief that shadowed her 3 years ago has lifted. She moves with confidence, seems settled at home. We embrace, and I feel genuine relief. I worried about her after she lost her parents, worried she would have nowhere to go, no way to support herself. But she has clearly found her place. "Catherine, you look well." "I am well, better than I have been in years. Come, Mr. Ashcroft is eager to meet you." She leads me to a library, a beautiful room, 2 stories high, shelves covering all walls, tall windows overlooking the grounds. A fire burns in the grate despite the mild weather, and seated at a large table covered with documents is a man perhaps 50 years old, grey-haired, with the slightly distracted manner of a scholar. "Dr. Ashford," he says, standing to shake my hand. "Thomas Ashcroft, thank you for coming. Catherine speaks very highly of your work." "Mr. Ashcroft, I am pleased to be here. Your estate appears to have excellent research potential." "Excellent and complicated. Please sit. Let me explain what I am hoping you can accomplish." We settle at the table. Catherine sits beside me, her expression suggesting she knows something I do not yet understand. "I purchased Blackwood 2 years ago," Ashcroft begins. "Since then, I have been researching its history as part of my broader study of sacred landscapes and sites of historical significance. What I have discovered is, fragmentary, pieces that do not quite connect, documents that suggest patterns but do not fully explain them. I need someone with your expertise to synthesize these fragments, to write a coherent historical account that explains what this place has been, what it is, and perhaps what it needs to be. That is precisely the kind of work I do, Mr. Ashcroft. Country estates often have complex histories that require careful reconstruction. Excellent. I should mention that several people have contributed to the research already. Catherine, of course, Mr. William Thorne, my groundskeeper, who has invaluable institutional memory. He has been here 40 years. A solicitor named James Pemberton compiled legal documents regarding property boundaries and covenants. An artist, Elena Hartwell, created visual documentation. And a surveyor, Edmund Hartwell, mapped the estate and wrote an unusual but illuminating report on the eastern boundary. I note the names in my field book, quite a team of researchers, and what specific questions do you hope I can answer? The central question is this: what is the nature of the obligation between owners of this property and the land itself? The documentary evidence suggests a pattern of preservation extending back to 1687, but I want to understand why. What created this obligation? How was it maintained? And how can future owners be helped to understand it? This is exactly my area of expertise: social obligation, property relationships, continuity of practice across generations. I will need access to all archival materials, deeds, correspondence, household accounts, anything that survives from the past 200 years. You will have it. The library contains most of the estate papers, organized chronologically. Catherine can guide you to specific collections. And I will want to interview Mr. Thorne. Oral history from long-serving staff is invaluable. Of course, anything you need. We discuss practical matters, where I will work, how long I expect to stay, my daily schedule. It is agreed that I will have unlimited access to the library and archives, will take my meals with the household, and will report my findings as I discover them. One more thing, Ashcroft says as Mrs. Crawford arrives to show me to my room. This house has qualities that may affect your research. Catherine can explain. I merely suggest that you keep an open mind about sources of historical knowledge. Sometimes the past makes itself known in ways that do not appear in documents. An odd comment, but scholars often develop peculiar relationships with their research subjects. I do not pursue it. My room is on the second floor, east wing, with a view over the grounds. I unpack methodically, clothing in the wardrobe, toilet articles on the dresser, research materials on the writing desk. My field books, pens, magnifying glass for examining faded handwriting, portable inkwell, everything in order. Catherine appears at my door before I finish. Aunt Margaret, may I come in? Of course. She enters and sits on the bed, watching me with an expression I cannot quite read. I am glad you are here, she says finally. I have wanted to tell you about this place for so long, but I did not know how to explain in a letter. Explain what? That Blackwood is not like other estates you have researched. The history here is not just written in documents, it is woven into the fabric of the house itself. The stones remember, the rooms hold memories, and if you are willing to listen, truly listen, the past will teach you directly. I sit in the chair opposite her. Catherine, that is poetic language, but history requires evidence. I cannot write scholarly work based on feelings or impressions. I know, and you will find evidence, documents, letters, legal records, but you will also find things that documents cannot fully explain. Patterns that suggest the estate itself has agency, consciousness, memory. When you encounter these things, please do not dismiss them simply, because they do not fit your methodological framework. You are asking me to accept supernatural explanations for historical phenomena. I am asking you to observe what is actually here, not just what your training tells you should be here. You taught me that, Aunt Margaret. You always said a good historian follows the evidence wherever it leads. She is right, I did teach her that, and I meant it. Very well, I will keep an open mind, but I will also apply rigorous standards of evidence. If this house wants to convince me it has consciousness, it will need to provide compelling proof. Catherine smiles. It will. The question is whether you will recognize the proof when you see it. I begin work the next morning in the library. The collection is extensive, shelf after shelf of leather-bound ledgers, tied bundles of correspondence, deed boxes, account books spanning 2 centuries. It is beautifully organized, which surprises me. Country house archives are typically chaotic, papers stuffed into boxes in no particular order. But here, everything is sorted chronologically, labeled clearly, easily accessible. I start with the foundational documents. The 1687 deed establishing the estate, Richard Blackwood's correspondence and account books from the early years, family records documenting the first generation. The work is familiar and satisfying. I transcribe relevant passages into my field book, note connections between documents, begin building a timeline of ownership and key events. What emerges is a story I have seen before in other estates. Merchant made wealthy through trade, purchased land to establish gentility, built house to signal status, managed property to generate income while maintaining social position. But there are peculiarities. Richard Blackwood's correspondence includes multiple references to agreements with local people and preservation of sacred ground. His account books show no income from the eastern portion of the estate, no timber harvesting, no grazing leases, no agricultural use at all, just annual payments to maintain it in natural state. This is unusual. Most landowners maximized income from every possible source. Preserving acres of wild forest without economic return suggests either incompetence or deliberate choice. The documents suggest deliberate choice. I find a letter from Richard Blackwood to his London attorney, dated 1689. You question my decision to leave the eastern lands unproductive. I assure you it is not sentiment, but pragmatism. The local people made clear that their cooperation depends upon preservation of what they call sacred ground. As I cannot profitably work an estate without local labor, the calculation is simple. I preserve the forest and gain willing tenants, or I clear it and face constant resistance. The choice is obvious. So it was economic calculation. He needed local cooperation more than he needed timber revenue. But there is more. In his private journal, which I find in a locked drawer that Catherine shows me how to open, he writes, I sit beside the spring tonight, as has become my habit. The water is very cold and very clear. It rises from depths I cannot measure. The local people say it has been here since before memory, since before there were people to name it. They may be right. There is something about this place that suggests great age, great patience. I find myself reluctant to disturb it, not because I fear superstition, but because I have come to respect what I do not fully understand. This is different. This suggests personal conviction beyond mere economic strategy. I make notes. Richard Blackwood's preservation of eastern lands driven by 1. Economic necessity, local cooperation, 2. Personal respect for what he termed great age and patience. Question: how did this personal conviction become institutionalized across generations? I work through the morning, documenting the pattern of preservation through Richard's son, grandson, successive generations of Blackwoods. Each generation leaves similar records: minimal economic use of eastern lands, references to maintaining agreements, and traditional understanding. The continuity is remarkable. Over 200 years, every owner honored the preservation, even as economic conditions changed, even as timber became more valuable, even as agricultural intensification made unused land increasingly anomalous. Why? At noon, Catherine brings me tea and sandwiches. "You are finding the documents helpful?" she asks. "Very, the pattern is clear, systematic preservation across generations, but I do not yet understand the mechanism. What enforced this continuity? Most estates changed practices as ownership changed. Blackwood did not. Why? Perhaps because the estate itself ensured continuity. Catherine, estates do not have agency. People make decisions. Do they, or do places shape the people who occupy them, teach them what is necessary, ensure they understand their obligations? I sip my tea, considering. You are suggesting the house influenced its owners toward preservation. That is a claim requiring extraordinary evidence. Keep reading the documents, Aunt Margaret. The evidence is there if you are willing to see it. I spend the afternoon with the 19th century records. The pattern continues: preservation, minimal economic use, references to maintaining sacred ground and traditional agreements. But the language becomes more interesting. Mrs. Blackwood the Elder, died 1865, kept extensive journals. She was clearly intelligent, observant, and deeply connected to the estate. Her entries describe daily life in meticulous detail: garden work, household management, social obligations. But she also writes about the house itself. February 14, 1863. The house is particularly aware tonight. I can feel it observing me as I write. This does not frighten me, though I know some would find it unsettling. I have lived here 40 years. The house knows me as I know it. We have reached an understanding. And about the spring. May 3, 1864. I sit beside the spring, as I often do when troubled. The water is cold and constant. It has risen here for thousands of years, indifferent to human concerns, yet somehow attentive to those who approach with respect. I tell it my worries, my illness, my fear of leaving my son unprepared for what he will inherit, and I feel, not answered precisely, but acknowledged. The spring listens. It has always listened. This is extraordinary primary source material. Mrs. Blackwood is describing a phenomenological relationship with place that transcends typical Victorian domestic sentimentality. I photograph the relevant pages, transcribe key passages, cross-reference with other documents from the same period. And then I notice something odd. The documents are arranging themselves. I set down a bundle of 1850s correspondence to consult a deed from 1823. When I look back at the correspondence, it has been joined by Mrs. Blackwood's journal from the same period, which I know I left on a different shelf. I must have moved it without noticing. Research work can be absent-minded like that. But then it happens again. I am reading Richard Blackwood's 1701 survey notes, the failed attempt to measure the eastern boundary. I set them aside to check the 1687 original deed for boundary language. When I turn back, the survey notes have been joined by Edmund Hartwell's 1891 survey report, which I had not yet retrieved from the shelf. I did not move that document. I stand and walk around the table, examining the scattered papers. They are not random. They are sorted by theme: all documents related to boundaries in one pile, all documents related to the spring in another, all personal journals and correspondence in a third. I did not organize them this way. The archive is helping you, Catherine says from the doorway. I startle. How long have you been there? A few minutes. I saw the documents moving themselves and thought you might need explanation. She enters the room, completely at ease with what she is describing. The house wants you to understand. It is showing you connections, arranging evidence, teaching you how to read its history. Catherine, documents do not move themselves. I must have organized them subconsciously. Did you, when you have been sitting in that chair for hours, you did not stand to rearrange papers? She is right. I have not left the chair except to retrieve documents from the shelves. This is impossible. No, it is unusual, but it is not impossible. The house has memory, consciousness, agency. It knows you are trying to understand its history, and it is assisting your research. I sit heavily, staring at the arranged documents. My training, my entire methodological framework, insists this cannot be happening. But the evidence before me suggests otherwise. If I include this in my historical account, that the house arranges its own archive, I will be dismissed as incompetent or delusional. Then perhaps your historical account needs to be written for a different audience, not for other scholars who will demand conventional evidence, but for future owners who need to understand what they are taking on. Truth matters more than professional credibility, does it not? I have always believed that, but I have never had to choose between them before. Let me continue working, I say finally. I will observe what happens, and I will decide later how to document it. Catherine nods and withdraws, leaving me alone with the self-organizing archive. Over the next 3 days, I work systematically through 200 years of documents. And the pattern becomes undeniable. Every generation of Blackwood owners experienced something that convinced them to preserve the eastern lands. Not economic calculation alone, though that played a role, but personal experience of the spring, the forest, the house itself. They describe it in different language, depending on their era and education. Richard Blackwood, 1687, great age and patience that commands respect. His son, 1723, presence beyond human measurement. Mrs. Blackwood, 1860s, awareness that observes and remembers. Edmund Blackwood, 1880, sacred obligation that transcends ownership. Different words, same experience. And interwoven through these personal testimonies are practical documents showing how the preservation was maintained. Deeds with restrictive language. James Pemberton's 1889 legal work builds on centuries of precedent. Correspondence with tenants about maintaining boundaries. Account books showing minimal economic use of eastern lands. Survey attempts 1701, 1776, 1823, 1891, all concluding measurement is problematic. Family instructions passed down about obligations to preserve. I create a timeline, mapping the interaction between personal experience and institutional practice. 1687, Richard Blackwood makes original covenant, economic plus personal respect. 1701, son attempts survey, fails, concludes boundary is covenant not geometry. 1750, third generation, maintains practice, writes preservation into family instructions. 1823, survey, attempt produces incomplete documentation, but recommends continued preservation. 1865, Mrs. Blackwood dies, leaves detailed journals describing relationship, with House Spring. Asterisk 1887, asterisk George Hartwell, non-family owner, violates covenant by clearing forest. Asterisk 1889, Thomas Ashcroft purchases, restoration begins. Asterisk 1889-1891, asterisk multiple contributors help re-establish covenant. William Thorne, groundskeeper, physical witness and care. Catherine Ashford, ward, spiritual memory. James Pemberton, solicitor, legal codification. Elena Hartwell, artist, visual documentation. Edmund Hartwell, surveyor, functional boundary definition. The pattern is clear. When family ownership ended, Hartwell purchase, the covenant was nearly broken. But Ashcroft's purchase initiated a new form of preservation, not through family continuity, but through diverse professional contributions. This is the synthesis Ashcroft wanted, the coherent historical narrative explaining the obligation. But as I write my preliminary notes, something else happens. The documents begin showing me things I did not search for. I am working on the 1889 transition period when a portfolio I did not request appears on the table. It contains Elena Hartwell's paintings, not the originals, but photographs of them, carefully mounted and labeled. I examine them with growing wonder. The paintings show layered time, the spring as it appears now and as it appeared centuries ago, simultaneously present. The walled garden in current dormancy and past bloom, both visible. The house inhabited by present residents and ghostly figures from earlier eras. These are not conventional landscape paintings. They are historical documents of a kind I have never encountered, visual evidence of temporal layering, of past persisting in present. I photographed them for my research file. Cross-reference with Mrs. Blackwood's journals. She describes the garden exactly as Elena painted it in full bloom, though Elena painted it dormant. The archive is teaching me, showing me how different forms of evidence connect, how the groundskeeper's physical witness, the ward's spiritual experience, the solicitor's legal framework, the artist's visual record, the surveyor's functional maps, all document the same underlying reality from different methodological perspectives. I am beginning to understand what Ashcroft meant about sources of historical knowledge that do not appear in conventional documents. That evening at dinner, I report my preliminary findings. The pattern is clear, I tell Ashcroft and Catherine. Blackwood has been preserved through two mechanisms: institutional continuity, family ownership, legal language, boundary maintenance, and experiential conviction, personal encounter with what the estate is leads each generation to honor preservation. When institutional continuity broke end of family ownership, experiential conviction had to be re-established through your diverse team of contributors. Exactly, Ashcroft says, and can you document this in a way that future owners will understand? I can document it. Whether they will accept it depends on their willingness to recognize non-conventional evidence. The personal journals, the paintings, the survey reports that acknowledge measurement failure, these are real documents, but they tell a story that challenges conventional historical frameworks. Let then tell the story truthfully and let readers make their own judgments. That is all I ask. On the fourth day, I decide to visit the spring itself. I have been documenting what others experienced. Now I should observe the location directly, assess it with my own eyes. William Thorne offers to guide me. He is perhaps 70, moving with the ease of someone who knows this land intimately. As we walk toward the eastern lands, he talks about his years here, his memories of different owners, the changes he has witnessed. "You are Mrs. Blackwood's niece's aunt," he says, not a question. "Yes, Catherine is my niece. She has found her place here, become keeper of memory. That is important work. She tells me the estate has consciousness, that the house remembers. And you are skeptical, as a trained historian should be, but you are also curious, or you would not have walked out here with me. What will convince you, Dr. Ashford? What evidence would a sentient place need to provide? Consistency, multiple independent witnesses reporting similar experiences, documentation that can be verified, phenomena that cannot be explained by conventional means. You have consistency, 200 years of owners describing similar encounters. You have independent witnesses, groundskeeper, ward, solicitor, artist, surveyor, each from different backgrounds reaching similar conclusions. You have documentation, journals, legal records, paintings, surveys. What remains? Personal experience. I need to observe directly, not rely on others' testimony. Then observe. We reach the cleared area. It is beautiful in the autumn light. Stumps weathered grey, young saplings in brilliant colour, grasses gone golden. And in the centre, the spring. A circular brick structure, very old, moss-covered, clearly the same structure described in documents from 1687. Water bubbles up through white stones, constant and clear. I kneel beside it, examining the brickwork. The construction technique confirms the dating, late 17th century, characteristic English bond, lime mortar consistent with the period. "Touch the water," Thorne says quietly, "if you are willing." "Why?" "Because the spring shares its memory with those who approach with respect and genuine curiosity. You are both. It will teach you if you let it. I should refuse, should maintain scholarly detachment, should observe without participating. But I came here to follow evidence wherever it leads. I dip my fingers into the water. The vision is immediate and overwhelming. I see the spring as it has been for millennia, rising from depths that predate human presence, from geological time measured in epochs, not years. I see the first people who found it, who recognized it as sacred without need for explanation. They built the first markers, not to control, but to acknowledge. I see Richard Blackwood standing where I stand now, making his covenant, not because he believed in spirits, but because he understood respect. The water teaches him that some things are diminished by being possessed completely. I see Mrs. Blackwood sitting here in 1864, dying, telling the spring her fears, and the spring listening, patient and eternal, offering what comfort cold water can give. I see George Hartwell planning to pipe the water to the house, see the spring resisting, see the land responding, see the covenant breaking, and then being slowly, carefully restored. I see Catherine receiving these same visions 2 years ago, becoming keeper of what she witnessed. And I see myself kneeling beside the spring in 1891, completing a different kind of research than I intended, not extracting knowledge from reluctant sources, but receiving instruction from a teacher willing to share. The vision fades. I am kneeling beside the spring, my hand still in the cold water, Thorne standing patiently behind me. "You saw," he says, not a question. I saw something, memory, history, time collapsed into simultaneity. And what will you do with what you saw? I pull my hand from the water and stand. My historian's training wars with the experience I just had. I will document it, not as supernatural phenomenon requiring suspension of disbelief, but as phenomenological data. Multiple witnesses across 2 centuries report similar experiences at this location. I experience something consistent with their reports. That is evidence. Whether the water actually holds memory or induces memory-like experiences through some mechanism we do not yet understand is less important than the documented pattern. You will write that in your historical account. I will write what I observed, and I will present it alongside the conventional documentary evidence, deeds, correspondence, account books. Readers can decide which evidence they find more convincing. Thorne smiles. The spring approves. It has been waiting for someone who could synthesize all the fragments into coherent whole. You are that person, Dr. Ashford. We walk back toward the house, and I begin composing in my mind the most unusual historical account I have ever written. I spend the next week writing. Not a conventional historical monograph, something different, a comprehensive account that includes Part I, documentary evidence, asterisk. Deeds, legal records, boundary documentation. Family correspondence and account books. Survey reports and maps. Oral history from William Thorne. Part II, experiential evidence, asterisk. Personal journals describing encounters with house spring. Elena Hartwell's paintings as visual documentation. Consistent reports across multiple witnesses. My own experience at the spring. Part III, historical analysis. Pattern of preservation across generations. Mechanisms of institutional continuity. Role of personal conviction in maintaining covenant. How diverse professional contributions re-established protection when family ownership ended. Part IV, implications for future stewardship. Understanding estate as relationship, not possession. Importance of experiencing place, not just documenting it. Need for diverse perspectives, physical care, spiritual openness, legal protection, artistic vision, scientific honesty, historical synthesis. Framework for future owners to understand their obligations. It is the most complete account of a single property I have ever produced, and the most vulnerable to professional criticism. But it is truthful, and truth, I still believe, matters more than professional safety. On the 8th day, I present my preliminary draft to Ashcroft. He reads it slowly, carefully, making occasional notes. Catherine sits with us, offering comments when asked. Finally, he sets it down. This is extraordinary work, Dr. Ashford. You have accomplished exactly what I hoped, a synthesis that makes sense of all the scattered pieces. The documentary evidence alone would be valuable, but combined with the experiential accounts and your own observations, this becomes something unique, a historical account that acknowledges the limitations of conventional methodology while still maintaining scholarly rigor. It will be controversial, of course, but it will also be true, and for future owners of this estate, truth is what they need, not comfortable fictions about mere property, but honest assessment of what stewardship requires. What will you do with it? Keep it here in the library as primary documentation for anyone who wishes to understand Blackwood. Provide copies to the County Historical Society and the local archives. And perhaps, if you are willing, publish it as a case study in historical methodology, an example of how historians might approach places where conventional documentary evidence is insufficient. That would require expanding the theoretical framework section, engaging with debates about phenomenology, historical epistemology, the relationship between subjective experience and objective documentation. Would you be willing to do that work? I consider this could make my career a methodological innovation that opens new avenues of historical research, or it could end it, dismissal as incompetent, loss of scholarly credibility. But the work is true, and I have always believed truth matters most. Yes, I will expand it into a full scholarly monograph. It may take another year. You are welcome to stay here as long as you need. The library is yours, and the house, I think, approves of your work. That night, I am working late in the library when something remarkable happens. The documents begin arranging themselves into a different pattern. Not by theme this time, but chronologically, creating a visual timeline across the table. Each generation of owners in order, their key documents sorted by date, creating a physical representation of continuity. And at the end of the timeline, blank space, where future owners will add their contributions. I understand what the house is showing me. This is not a completed history, but an ongoing one. I am documenting what has been so that what comes next can build on proper understanding. Catherine enters, carrying 2 cups of tea. The house is teaching you its final lesson, she says, setting a cup before me. What lesson? That history is not just past, but present and future. You came here to document what happened, but what you are creating will shape what happens next. Future owners will read your account, and it will influence how they understand their obligations, how they approach stewardship, what they preserve. That is a responsibility I did not anticipate, but one you can bear. You have the skills, the training, the intellectual honesty, and more than that, you have experienced what you are documenting. You know it is real. I sip the tea, looking at the timeline spread before me. When I arrived, I believed I could remain detached, document without participating, but I cannot write about this place without acknowledging that it has changed me, that I am part of its history now, not just its chronicler. That is not a failure of scholarly objectivity, Aunt Margaret. That is recognition of reality. We are always part of what we study. The question is whether we acknowledge it. She is right, and my historical account will need to include that acknowledgement. Over the next months, I continue working, writing, revising, expanding the theoretical framework, engaging with philosophical debates about historical knowledge and subjective experience. And gradually, the monograph takes shape. Blackwood Estate, a case study in experiential history and the phenomenology of place. It argues that some historical subjects cannot be fully understood through documentary evidence alone, that places with long, continuous human occupation develop what might be termed accumulated memory, patterns of experience and practice so deeply embedded that they shape future interactions, that historians studying such places must be willing to experience as well as document, to participate as well as observe. I send the manuscript to my publisher in March 1892. They are uncertain. This is unlike anything I have written before, but they trust my scholarly reputation and agree to publish. The book appears in October 1892. Reviews are mixed. Dr. Ashford has abandoned scholarly rigor for mysticism. Journal of Historical Studies. A groundbreaking methodology that may open new avenues of research. Cambridge Historical Review. Impossible to dismiss, impossible to fully accept, a troubling and brilliant work. The Historian's Quarterly. But the review that matters most comes from an unexpected source. A letter from an owner of another estate in Yorkshire who writes, Dr. Ashford, I read your account of Blackwood with great interest. We face similar challenges here, a property with patterns of preservation that cannot be fully explained by economic logic, places that resist conventional documentation, family traditions that suggest deeper obligations than mere ownership. Your methodology gives me framework for understanding what we have here. Might you consider conducting similar research at our estate? And then another and another. I have inadvertently created a new field of historical research, and I will spend the rest of my career documenting places where the past is not safely distant but immediately present, where history writes itself into those who pay attention. I leave Blackwood in November 1892 after 14 months of research and writing. But I return regularly, twice a year, usually staying a week or two to consult documents, observe changes, update my ongoing research. On one such visit in 1894, I find something remarkable. The library has been reorganized, not by Mrs. Crawford or Catherine or even Ashcroft, by the house itself. A new shelf has appeared. I know it is new because I have mapped this library thoroughly, and on it, my published monograph, Elena Hartwell's painting photographs, Edmund Hartwell's survey report, James Pemberton's declaration of restrictive covenant, William Thorne's oral history transcripts, which Catherine recorded, and Catherine's own journals documenting her experience. All the contemporary contributions to Blackwood's preservation, gathered in one place. Beneath them, a small brass plate, Preservation 1887-1892, the restoration of the covenant through diverse witness. The house has created its own archive of the recent past, ensuring that future researchers, future owners, will find these documents together, will understand how collective effort preserved what individual action nearly destroyed. I photograph the shelf, document its contents, add a note to my research file. And I realize I am no longer just historian but archivist, keeper of documents and memory, part of the continuing story of how this place preserves itself through those willing to serve it. The archive lives, it grows, it teaches. And I train to believe the past is dead, that history is what happened long ago, now understand that some places never stop being historical, that the archive is not just record but active participant, that the best way to honor what was is to ensure it shapes what will be. I shelve my latest research notes in the collection, adding my contribution to the ongoing documentation. The house, I think, approves, and the spring continues to rise, constant and patient, holding memory that my research barely touched, waiting for the next historian who will try to understand what water remembers when it has been rising for 10,000 years.